Hello, I'm Hanya Salah, Deputy Director at the Columbia Global Center in Amman. Thank you for joining us today for our virtual panel discussion on women in the workforce lifting economies. This discussion is part of a series of events organized by the network of Columbia Global Centers for Women's History Month. The impetus for this webinar came about from a previous event in our series with business leaders, titled Mitigating the Repercussions of COVID-19 on Jordan's Economy. Our aim then was to offer perspectives and shed light on the most likely pathways toward a national economic recovery, as well as the potential risks that must be averted by policymakers. Today, with our distinguished group of panelists, our aim is to offer perspectives and shed light on women's current experiences in the Jordanian economy. It is vitally important to consider women's experiences as they are the most vulnerable in the labor market, especially in Jordan, where women's participation in the labor force is one of the lowest in the Middle East, North Africa region, even before the pandemic struck. The containment efforts and shutting down of large sectors of the economy have triggered an unavoidable economic crisis. In Jordan, the considerable disruption to many industries presents major financial implications and challenges. This is particularly worrisome when taking into consideration that these women who are active in the workforce are overrepresented in the sectors hardest hit by COVID, such as education and health. Recent reports also find Jordanian women to be disproportionately disadvantaged than men with regards to entrepreneurial endeavors and other income-generating opportunities. Not only do women have to navigate the existing systemic barriers, but the pandemic has instigated new challenges that must be addressed to promote rethinking women's roles with the aim of identifying solutions. Our discussion today pertains to how women's impact and resilience can be maximized in Jordan's long-term economic recovery. I would now like to hand over to Mary Nazzal, who will serve as the moderator for this conversation. Mary is a barrister and social entrepreneur whose career has focused on social justice. Named as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum and one of Forbes magazine's most powerful Arab women, she has been recognized for her legal activism, business success, and community impact. Mary is the founder of Landmark Hotels and founding partner of 17 Ventures, which seeks to advance the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you again to everyone in our virtual audience for being with us. We encourage you to send in your questions through the Q&A chat box at the bottom of your screen. We will address them in the latter half of this webinar. Please join me in welcoming Mary. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Hanya, for that very generous introduction. I am really delighted to welcome you to this webinar this evening, and thank you to everyone at the Columbia Center for hosting this very important discussion. As Hanya mentioned, today we will highlight women's current experiences in the Jordanian economy with a focus on how we can maximize women's impact and resilience in Jordan's long-term recovery. We would like this to be an interactive session where we are taking stock of where we are, but also looking forward together during this very difficult time. So please do use the Q&A tab and I will get to your questions about halfway in. We have curated a panel of experts who not only understand the landscape, but are active on the ground on a daily basis dealing with these issues. I will introduce them briefly. Dr. Salma Nims, Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women, Reem Aslan, technical gender expert at the International Labour Organization, the ILO, Sukhtian, Managing Director of the MicroFund for Women, and Fida Taher, Managing Partner at Amam Ventures. Before we jump into the discussion, allow me just 1 minute to provide some additional introductory context in addition to what Hanya mentioned. So reports estimate that approximately 11 million full-time jobs were lost in MENA as a result of the pandemic. According to the OECD, the socioeconomic fallout of the crisis is particularly severe for women in MENA, as existing inequalities are exacerbated and women are experiencing greater regression in employment. Needless to say, women also have to navigate the gendered impact of increased social and caretaking responsibility for their families. Pre-pandemic, the average female labor force participation rate in MENA was about 24%, barely more than half of the global average of 47%. As Hanya mentioned, women's labor force participation in Jordan is the lowest in MENA and the fourth lowest in the world. As for Jordanian women working in low-wage, informal, and seasonal sectors, the pandemic has significantly reduced income-generating opportunities, which has had a direct impact on many households across Jordan. All this, plus the health and psychological harm being inflicted on women, focuses us to pause and take stock of where we are, and more importantly, plan with urgency what we are going to do about it. So with no further ado, I'd like to start with Dr. Salma, please. We'd like to start with a macro view of where we are and discuss what are the factors that are currently impacting women's role in the economy today.
Thank you so much for Columbia University and for to Hanya and to you, Mary, for setting the scene. And I think you've covered a lot of issues that are affecting women. But to start with even the pre-COVID situation and then to move forward, as you said, women's economic participation in Jordan is quite low. When we talk formally, I always say, if we actually look at Jordanian women, I think that 80% of women work some way or another, are contributing to the income of their families some way or another, but unfortunately, they are actually outside the formal sector. And this is actually, as you said, within the COVID situation has the most impact of them, but also there was impact on women in the formal sector. And we see women are actually losing jobs. The latest number of unemployments that came out of Jordan said that 39,000 women went into unemployment last year. Another study there is the Pulse study by the World Bank in 2020, says that it's on enterprise surveys, and it covers also the situation of enterprises. But I want to just highlight a number that the share of females in full-time jobs in Jordan has dropped last year 6.3%. And in small businesses, it's actually dropped 8.7%, and in large businesses, 7%. In the manufacturing businesses, it dropped 4.2%, and in services, it dropped 7.4% from their original share. So it is actually, the situation is worsening. And the problem, as we always said, that COVID has revealed the previous inequalities and then deepened these inequalities. Law and legislation still is far away from being sufficient to give women equal opportunity to access jobs, to continue in jobs, to not feel discriminated against, and not to have the typical mainstream gender roles and stereotyped gender roles within our society affecting their ability to be able to work, considering that the private sector environment is still not family responsive. And I want to focus on being family responsive, because we always say that this is about the children and the right of the families. And obviously still we need a lot of policies to move forward. We still have the inequalities in terms of pay equity, not to mention the issues of infrastructure, including transportation, access to daycare, all of these issues that were there and definitely have contributed to worsening the situation of women within the formal sector. Closing the schools has contributed to women going out of business. And now I wanted to highlight that with the government saying that, okay, women in the public sector, now that we closed school again, can actually work from home. I think that's actually not enough, because it should have been given to men and women, this opportunity, considering that maybe a mother could be working in the private sector. She does not have the luxury to work from home. So basically, maybe the father who works in the public sector can make up for it. And there are fathers who are working. I think that even the issue of accessing rights, like reaching justice, we've been dealing for the past year with all the practices of businesses of some sectors who have been taken away some rights of women, not paying their salaries, paying lower salaries, forcing them to take vacations. All of that, unfortunately, the frameworks for sending our even when they actually complain, and even when we write and send the complaints to the government, it's still the response and the ability to ensure implementation of rights and of instructions, despite that there were some defense directives and orders that were trying to protect women, but ensuring responsiveness and implementation has been very weak. So because we have a weak public structure systems to ensure that. So we see that women are now, there is the law, there is the implementation, there are the practices, and then there is the social aspect that till today, the burden is still on women. It is increasing and it's pushing them outside the sector, the workforce.
Thank you. Thank you so much for setting the scene. I want to understand, since you have an insider view on all this, and since you mentioned there have been some gender sensitive responses, but you really need more women in the crisis response to have a gender sensitive approach. Can you tell us, have women's voices been heard at the table when it comes to looking at the crisis response? And go ahead.
No, I mean, that's the short answer. But yes, I mean, first of all, we do not have the right structures. So definitely from day one, I would say 1 week through the lockdown, the Jordanian National Commission for Women sent a brief to the government, a short 3-pager brief of what can they do to ensure that they are responding to the needs of women and other vulnerable groups. And there were three main areas to talk about. There was the issue of having us on the table, not only the Jordanian National Commission for Women, but civil society organizations and other organizations that work with vulnerable groups. Unfortunately, till today, we don't even know who is responding to what. And this is an issue that's affecting all Jordanians, all those who are living in Jordan, but it is even more negative on women, because we feel like we're always putting off fires. The decision comes and then we have to respond. We have to keep reminding the government that this is not working, this has an impact. And unfortunately, even with the Interministerial Committee for Women Empowerment, which we sit on, and it has more than 10 ministers on it, although the ministers themselves, you feel that they believe in the issue, they meet with us, they try to follow up on issues, but obviously the structure of the Interministerial Committee is not seen as an important structure to influence these other decision-making structures. And then there is the issue of looking at women who are actually participating in responding, women in the front line, now we are seeing 1 year down the line, what's happening to women specifically in the health sector. They are burnt out, and now we are seeing more and more younger women and men dying who are working in the health sector, which means that nothing was done to protect them. And only 2 days ago, the decision was made that they should be given priority for the vaccination. And this is, and we're seeing that everything is like an afterthought. It's like seeing the impact and then deciding to deal with it when we had the opportunity to actually plan and respond properly, instead of reaching this point where I feel there is a chaos in the situation now. And nobody, as if everything is ad hoc, and this is really scary 1 year down the line.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think many would agree that the government responses have been very reactive. We don't have a strategic plan in place. It is very ad hoc, like you mentioned. Reem, I want to go to you on the policy side, just building on what Salma was saying. I would like you to speak to two things. Number one, I know certain policies have been put in place. We've spoken about that, maternity insurance and so on, but also thinking forward, what other policies do you think we need to be putting in place with immediate effect to be mitigating the effects on women and others?
Thank you, Mary, and thank you for the Columbia Global Centers for the invitation. First, I would like just to briefly talk about the International Labour Organization. The International Labour Organization was established in 1919, and it calls for decent work and social justice. So that's the core of the mandate of the ILO. It's based on member states, and Jordan is one of the member states in the ILO. And there you have representation from the employers, from the government, and also from the trade union. Well, there we basically set the international labor standards, and Jordan is part of that process. Now, Salma touched on many important issues. Now, if anything, COVID-19 has emphasized again the need to align our national legislation with the international labor standards. And here we're talking about maternity protection, as you have mentioned, Mary, earlier. And we did achieve a lot under the maternity protection, but there is also work to be done still. We are also talking about the digital payments to protect wages of women and men. Digital payments actually under the National Committee for Pay Equity, which is headed by the Secretary General of Ministry of Labor and the Secretary General of JNC. We've been requesting the digital payment of wages for a number of reasons. If that was put in place, and it's not just because of COVID-19, we wouldn't have basically faced the challenges that we faced at the beginning of COVID-19 up until now, paying the minimum wage, making sure that people are paid on time, especially women in particular. They are not still being paid on time, and they are also not receiving the minimum wage. Also, you can also monitor the subscription with the Social Security to ensure that they are well protected if they are unemployed, and so on and so forth. The maternity protection in particular, the ILO with the Social Security Corporation, they established the maternity insurance back in 2010. What happened during COVID-19, we basically secured, or the Social Security also expanded the maternity insurance, where they cover the cost of daycare facilities for mothers. They subsidize the cost for mothers with children under the age of 5, and the cost ranges from 25 JDs to 60 JDs, depending on the income of the mother. So that's also, for us, it's quite an achievement, but at the same time, the number of families that can benefit from that program are only 28,000 families, because only the ones that are subscribed to the maternity insurance can benefit from that. The other program that the Social Security is working on with the ILO is basically, and our strategic partner Sadaqa, as well as civil society organization, whom probably you all know them, we basically have been also lobbying to cover the cost, the operational cost of the owners of nurseries in particular, because also in the past, before COVID-19, we were demanding the rights of the employees. Now with the COVID-19, actually, even women business owners are also suffering a lot during the crisis, because as Salma mentioned, education is also really crucial. Owners of the private schools and KGs are finding, financial struggles, rescheduling their loans, repaying their loans, paying the salaries as well. Although there were some, defense orders where istidama can cover part of the cost, but even with that, they are suffering big time, and we don't want them to end default their loans, and and after the defense orders are over, then they will be subject to be imprisoned. So that's on the maternity insurance. The digital wages, the payments on digital wages, it's also very, very important for us. Again, for transparency purposes, the government can see who was paid their wages, who were not. We can also see if there is a gender pay gap. So this is something that also needs to be done in Jordan. Again, these are all part of the international labor standards. Some of them were endorsed by Jordan and adopted by Jordan. Some of them are not. The last point that I also would like to highlight is the flexible work arrangements. In 2017, the government of Jordan adopted the flexible work arrangement, but it was not binding. And we don't want to be policing, the employers. On the contrary, it should be done, with maybe some kind of awards or, some benefits for the employers that do adopt the flexi work arrangements. The reason why we're asking for that, if you notice, mothers in particular, as well as fathers, they stayed at home during COVID-19 and still do, to basically help their children with the distance learning. If we had the flexible work arrangements in place, properly in place, then we would have protected women's jobs, even men's jobs as well, but also the flexi work arrangement would have worked better. Women can work, depending on their schedule of their children. So they are not expected to balance between work and family responsibilities where their employer still expects them to sit behind the desk at 8 o'clock and finish maybe at 3 or 4 or what have you. So at least there is some kind of flexibility. And also with the flexi work arrangements, according to the ILO standards, they also need to provide them with the proper tools. We've noticed many of the teachers in particular, they were paying for their internet services. They were also, they had to provide a computer. So all of these things would have been in place if the government of Jordan adopted the flexi work arrangements in the way that we thought it should be adopted, but we're still working on that. There is an appetite. So there are some glimpses of light here and there. The maternity insurance is one. The digital payments, we only have it in the private education sector, but as Salma was saying, we still receive complaints from the Stand Up with Teachers campaign that both our organizations established back in 2015. So there is still a long way to go. But still, you know, we're still hopeful and we keep pushing for these matters. Again, if COVID-19, you know, emphasized anything, just emphasize that these things are really important to be put in place. And if we worked on them early on, we wouldn't have faced the challenges that we faced during COVID-19.
Absolutely. Reem, I just want to ask you a question. Hala, we have a long way to go. I think we all realize this, but you and I had spoken about the successful campaign to get nurseries to stay open during the pandemic. So I just want to understand, you know, to all of us who really want to be active, we want to help with the mobilization efforts, you know, how did all those voices come together to ensure, you know, those voices were heard?
Actually, it's always the common narrative. We need to agree on a cause. So there was a national campaign. JNCW was part of that campaign. A number of civil society organizations were part of that campaign. A number of human rights activists, women and men, journalists, and so on. So they have had this common narrative. The ILO with another civil society organization, we also pushed from another angle. You know, we work with policymakers. And, you know, the civil society organizations work from the bottom up and we work from up down, you know, so, but we had the same narrative. So we succeeded in reopening the nurseries or keep the nurseries actually open. Now what we're trying to do as well is to do the same with the kindergartens, because the kindergartens were fully closed last year and they were still expected to pay wages. They were still expected to contribute to Social Security. Again, what we did, we formed a coalition for owners of KGs and schools. And what we did, we basically did a strategic planning session with them and we decided where to go. They decided where to go, to be honest. We only were facilitating that kind of linkages and communication. We basically communicated with the Central Bank of Jordan where they supported them in rescheduling their loans with no interest rates, with grace periods and so on. We also working as we speak with the Banks Association. So maybe we can also assess how difficult is it, financial difficulties that they are facing. So we can maybe establish a fund together, making sure that their businesses are going to be sustainable after we support them. We also worked with the Social Security Corporation where now the KGs can benefit from the Istidama program where 50% of the wages are covered by Social Security. Currently, we're working with the Minister of Education and Minister of Education with the hope that they will reopen the KGs when the pandemic, you know, the health situation allows for that, hopefully sometime in early April. So they can also continue their businesses and get some income and so on, and children can go back to KGs, as is the case with nurseries, because nurseries and KGs are more or less catering for the same age group. Nurseries from 0 or 70 days to 4 years and 8 months, and then the KGs from 4 years and 8 months to 6 years old. So more or less they're the same age group, and there is no difference between the two groups. So that's how we are trying to help them. So yeah, and I don't know if you to continue talking.
No, this is good. And I think all the working moms, you know, listening to this would totally agree with you. And what I'm hearing from you is some level of cautious optimism that there are some partners in the government that we can be working with. And I think that's important for us to hear at a time where people are really quite demoralized. I just want to move, thank you, Reem. Mona, please, we'd love to hear from you as sort of the leader of MicroFund for Women to understand, you know, the impact that the pandemic has had on your clients in particular, and on the fund. If you could just speak to that, please.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you to Columbia Centers for this opportunity to speak on such an important topic. So MicroFund for Women, for those of you who don't know, is a non-profit microfinance institution. It's the leading institution in Jordan that is led, the only one that is fully led by women. And of our 750 staff, we have more than 67% are female. And our clients, 150,000 clients, 97% of them are women. So we are a women's organization for women. Some of the things we tried as much, to always support our female employees as well. Some of the things you just mentioned, Reem, insurance. We've extended our maternity leave to 90 days because we think that's really quite helpful. And then this March, in celebration of Women's Day, actually we started giving free days. When women's family members also are sick, they can get a sick leave as well. Because that is the reality. And I think I'm mentioning all of these things because I do believe that when women are running organizations, they are much more sensitive to these issues. Etc. But to go back to our clients, so if everything that Salma was saying and with all the introductions about women's participation in the workforce was deeply disproportionately hurt, our clients were even harder hurt because they're at the lower level of income. So they really generally had very, very little cushion to rely on, especially families, for example, that were relying on day labor, or someone with a micro enterprise that was relying on tourism, or even if they had a little restaurant or even supermarket for a couple of months were not accessible or difficult to access. So these people were financially very, very badly hit. And it goes also, it's quite interesting to realize that these women, it's not the first time they're in crisis mode. What's different is that everyone's in crisis mode together, but low-income women are generally living from one crisis to the other, whether they are a refugee from Syria or a refugee living in a current refugee camp that we have now. They tend to carry a lot of burden. And in situations like this, we must always look for inspiration. And these women, as they have dealt with crisis over crisis in their lives, the way they come out with a certain amount of resilience, to me, is what the inspiration really is. Where we can look for reason for optimism is that change sometimes is possible. Change can happen. So in microfinance, several years ago, it was a taboo for women to even take a loan. Now the situation has really changed after people have seen what additional income can do for a family, and things did change. So what we tried to do at MFW, immediately after, was to really step out of our comfort zone and to try and understand how we could help women at the beginning of the crisis, because that was really when the most vulnerable needed the most help. So we sent out an application that we partnered with a small tech company to send out to our 150,000 clients, called Tamnuna, to ask them really if they had any specific needs that they really were after, whether it was food or any necessity. And 1,400 of them came back, and we then were able to send them stuff during lockdown, which was very important. I think again, when we're looking at this at our clients who were really deeply hit, we need to now think about what is the outlook for them? How can we stand next to them going forward to really see what their opportunities are? Some of them will be to pivot their business. Others will be that they will actually just need more support and will actually need government support. They will need some sort of handouts, etc. We tried as much as we can as a financial institution to stand with them, to really understand, because the women, if you think about it, 150,000 women don't all have the same needs. They don't all have the same circumstances. And with the variety of situation in their different households, the more we understand what specifically their problems are, the better we can actually approach them. So we try to adjust our financial offering. We try to do several things that financially would be able to support them. And that's really where we stand with them now.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back to that to hear more, but I'd love to just go to Fida right now. So Mona touched on the issue of access to finance, and obviously microfinance fills a big gap in the market, but also you as the co-head of Amam Ventures, have also identified, the need for different types of financing. In my firm as well, we're looking at filling a funding gap. I'd love it if you could give us a sense of the funding landscape when it comes to women in particular, and where the gaps are and where the opportunities are as well, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mary and Colombia, for having me here. So we've covered that, by the way, briefly on an informal session on Clubhouse a couple of days ago. But just to give a quick overview. So we've screened over 200 MSMEs, I would say, and we have come to realize that most of those women-led and co-led SMEs tend to cluster in certain sectors, such as creative sectors, F&B, education, healthcare, well-being, and so on. And those sectors are not really, your typical VC sectors. Those women as well, they don't have access to, banking facilities because they don't have collateral. And, you have your MFIs there and the early stage incubators sometimes, and sometimes the angel investors. And then there's a gap before you get to the growth stage where you have your VCs and PEs. And this gap in the middle is not really being properly addressed. So we found that there's a need to have a fund, an impact fund, that extends risk capital, not in the form of equity. And this capital needs to be coupled with technical support and business development support, because during our interactions and deep conversations with those women, they see that the non-financial support is actually as important for their continuity and their success and their growth as the financial support. So this is where Amam Ventures came about. So it's a $20 million impact fund and we invest obviously with a gender lens.
That's great, Fida. Thank you for the questions coming in from the audience. I'd like to just go back to the advocacy side for a moment, and maybe Reem and Salma, if you could speak to these questions. So first of all, there's a question on, are there any advocacy efforts to change the government's recent instructions on expanding access to telework to mothers as measures to adapt workplace arrangements? And these arrangements do not apply to parents regardless of what the sex is. And I think, Salma, you were speaking to that in your introduction. So Reem and Salma, if you'd like to just add some color to that.
At this point, as I said, I just signed a letter to the Prime Minister mentioning the importance of two things. First of all, that the response of the government in terms of closing schools should not be only for the private sector. It should take into consideration the impact on men and women who are working in the public in the private sector. You cannot just say, okay, the public sector can do this and leave all those who are working in the private sector outside the solutions. And then they should also take into consideration that there are mothers and fathers who are in the informal sector, who are actually not, they do not have there is no way for them to stop working and stay at home. And there is a danger that is actually on the children themselves regarding that issue. Because I'm telling you, I know mothers who are leaving their children under the age of 12 at home, taking care of their brothers or sisters who are 6 years old. And this is very dangerous. The second area, which actually the government need to know about, that there are centers all over Amman or that and the country that some parents are sending their children to. So we're closing schools, and I'm sorry, we have to keep thinking that under the gray age of 12, that should have been a different policy for them. Now, and also, we have also, in the same letter, I mentioned the importance of giving that opportunity for men and women in the public sector. Sadly, in the public sector, this is only given to women alone. And this is not solving the problem. And at least if they give this in the public sector to both men and women, then at least if one of the parents works in the private sector or is in a daily job and is unable, if the woman is that one, then at least the man can work from home if he's in the public sector. So now at this point, it's only a letter that I wrote and we sent to the Prime Minister, but definitely as we move forward, we always coordinate between us, the ILO, other civil society organizations. We're always in discussions of how do we move to the next step when the government is not responding. So it's an ongoing discussion, but sometimes we try to use the formal channels and see if it can work, because it's not always, it shouldn't always be a campaign. It's like, it shouldn't always be a confrontation. We need to learn when to see, okay, what is working now? Is there a window of opportunity in one way or another? The Interministerial Committee, for example, for Women Empowerment, how can we leverage that? And then the ILO as an international organization, how can we leverage that? But if that doesn't work, then we will take it to the next step.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Reem, do you want to add anything? Because if
yes,
not,
yes, please. Very quickly. It's because, again, I'm going to go back to the mandate of the ILO, advancing social justice. And here we're talking about social justice between men and women. Again, if you go back to the flexi-work arrangements that were endorsed back in 2017, unfortunately, when it was announced on the International Women's Day. Although flexi-work arrangements is for everybody, including persons with family responsibilities. And that's where we also need, to raise the awareness of civil society organizations that flexi-work arrangements are not only for women, it's actually for men and women, for children, persons with disability, and so on. So we need to be careful. And you said that at the beginning, Mary, the narrative, we should be very careful with the narrative. How do we package these messages? Again, with the flexi-work arrangements, now the government is re-looking at the flexi-work arrangements, and we need to be careful how it's phrased. Actually, the ones that were endorsed earlier, there was no discrimination between men and women. It was the same for both. So we did take that into consideration. Actually, I said children, I meant students, by the way. Flexi-work arrangements should apply to students, not to children. Yeah, over to you, Mary.
Okay, thank you. There is a question on the effectiveness of digital payment methods in women's empowerment. Mona, I'm going to come to you to answer that, but Reem, you spoke about digital payments in your intro. Can you speak to that question?
Yes, it's about financial inclusion and also to make sure that women are paid their wages according to what they signed on. It can be monitored. We do understand that some women pay back a certain percentage of their salaries back to the employer, but that is something else we need to work on, where we empower women not basically to do that. And that needs quite a bit of work. Stand Up with Teachers campaign, as you probably all know, they are well empowered and they are working on that round the clock. And actually they are now doing their work on their own after we supported them, the ILO, JNCW, the Ministry of Labor, we supported them for a good number of years. AHL in particular, the community organizing, which brings us back to the collective voice of women. Actually, that is what is helping them. Now there is a core group for the Stand Up with Teachers campaign, and they bring together all women and they basically lobby together, be it through campaigns or lobbying with officials and so on and so forth. Over to you, Mary.
That's great, thank you. Mona, let's have you speak to that question about digital payments, but also if you could speak to it within the broader context of innovation and tech and how MFW has really pivoted in the pandemic. I hope sort of what you give us will give other people inspiration. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the answer on digital payments was really clear. I would add that globally, digital payments definitely contribute substantially to financial inclusion. The conversation now is also, once you have included everyone through this payment system, what are actually people doing with this payment? Are they using it to make transactions, or are they only using it to cash in and cash out? And I think that would be the second level of conversation after this goal has been achieved. In terms of technology, I think one of the silver linings of COVID has been that it has accelerated technological projects in general all over. And although fintech sometimes has been dangled as a magic bullet for financial inclusion and of women and their empowerment, I don't, clearly there are no magic bullets. And I prescribe more to the a phygital world, which is physical and digital, where we really are using the best of both. Technology is amazing because it enables us to reach suddenly many, many more people. For example, this, what we're doing right now is going to people that would have only been for the audience who can make it on time. But even if you think of, we at MFW, we were able to develop mobile technology that was able mobile training, to train women on how to think of a business, how to start it up, and then how to develop it. And that normally would have been extremely costly to do for 10 women at a time. But this one was what reached to 10,000 women. One young lady actually, right after lockdown, when she finished her training, set up her business where she was developing toys for children, and today has a business because of that. Another thing of technology is it can provide practical services when you are partnering with other organizations. So for example, with MFW partnered with the Tibbi, so we gave together, we're able to give access to 16,000 women with telemedicine access to telehealth, who had issues other than just COVID and had to deal with it for themselves and their families. So of course, also then you have a lot more innovation in terms of the type of services that you're reaching your clients, and you can, with the information you're collecting, give much more individualized products and services that they're needed. So with all of that, we're very excited to think about all the new partnerships that we can all build together as organizations to complete each other's work, but now can have much stronger access because of technology and because we can bring our products together, our services, much easier because technology is allowing us to we can integrate the technology much better.
It's amazing what you've done, honestly. Fida, I'm curious, just being inspired by what Mona said, you're actively looking at a pipeline of gender lens companies. Can you give us a sense of what those companies look like, whether they're adopting any new innovation, whether they're using tech as an enabler to scale? Give us a sense of that. And if you also want to speak to innovation and financing, because honestly, what Amam is doing is very innovative. So Adi, just go ahead and speak to those points.
Sure, thanks, Mary. Before I get to that, can I just comment or build on what has been?
Of course, please go ahead.
So Dr. Salma mentioned that COVID uncovered a lot of existing inequalities that have been existing here for a while, and it did make matters significantly worse, of course. But let's just to give more context to that. So far, we still have less than 3% of our firms have women in senior management. Less than 4% of board seats are filled by women. Less than 2% of women are sole owners of businesses, and less than 5% of those businesses are well served by the banking sector. So when you look at all that, it's only natural that COVID is going to have a more drastic impact on women. And what Reem was saying about having joining efforts and having a unified narrative, and how civil society, and it's time to stop working in silos and all that. And because we've been part of the efforts that has been going with the preschools and the daycares and so on, I think this is what we need to do. We can't keep addressing an old problem with an old solution and expect a positive outcome. And this brings me to a year after Women in Business was established. Tamara and we came to the conclusion that we have to unlearn a lot of things, and we have to stop doing the things that we've been always doing the same way. And then we started listening more. And instead of trying to lead and manage this community of women, we came to the conclusion that what we need to do is we need to be led by the voices of those women. And right now we're actually in the process of designing a deep research about what are the real needs of MSMEs. What do women need? their financial needs, their business development needs. And we want to take that and put it out there for everyone to be able to use and be able to build on and be able to serve better. And now, Mary, I'm trying to think of what was your initial question.
No, don't worry about my initial question. That was a better answer. Tab, let's talk about this, because we know that women need support beyond capital. I mean, a lot of people do, not just women. And you're offering sort of technical assistance.
Exactly what that need is, Mary, because we sometimes assume and we start providing things and they're like, all right, but that's not what I need.
So you're still at the stage where you're sort of engaging with the stakeholders to understand what their needs are. And now, of course, their needs have changed within the pandemic. Tab, listen, just because it's so important to discuss this issue of women on boards, can you tell the audience a little bit about that program? Because I think it's just amazing.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you for being part of it. Thank you for supporting. So this is a program to be able to, put out there the next generation of female board members. We have had a call for application for women in senior management to apply to attend this IFC Board of Certification program. And we've received around 300 great applications. We've had an independent selection committee. They've selected 20 women. Those 20 women went through an intensive 8-week training course, and they've had to sit and take a formal exam to be able to get certified. Those women are now actually paying it forward by serving as advisors on the boards, on the advisory boards or sounding boards of 30 local women-led and co-led SMEs, while being mentored and coached and guided by women who are serving on boards and who can give them, some real life perspective on what it's like and open doors for them. So we've been receiving some really good feedback. And what we want to do is to be able to reach out to the companies that are out there. If you have a vacancy for an independent board members, please reach out to us, because we are, so far we have 20 great women, and this is going to go on for the next 3 years. And we do want to create a pipeline of women who are capable to serve on official boards.
No, that's great. And the women who are being qualified and being taken through your program are so impressive. And the companies that they're seeking to serve are also very impressive. There's a question on public transportation. Gosh, it's like the never-ending issue. And there's also, whoever wants to speak to that can speak to it. But there's another question which could be controversial, I don't know, to Dr. Salma in particular. Though I agree that the closing of schools does indeed hurt working mothers and is a gender issue, how do you put this forward as a pressing policy issue during a pandemic where many believe that opening schools is worsening the health situation? Whoever would like to speak to that in addition to Dr. Salma, I think it is an important issue we need to address.
Thank you so much. And I have to say that the problem in Jordan is different than the rest of the world. We know that in most countries, there were closures of schools. It's not like we're saying that we need to continue to stay as we are, as we were before. In a pandemic situation, in a country that still does not have a vaccination program that we know will able to cover all Jordanians, when we see an economy that there was no strategic planning in response to the pandemic, when the world is expecting that the pandemic might continue for another 2 years, you cannot say, make education as a last priority. In all countries who had to revert to closure, it was the last option to close the school. They closed everything, and the last thing they would close when nothing else works, they closed schools. And when they start opening, they start with schools. So what we needed is not to just say, we want to open schools. And that was actually, there was a whole anti-campaign that went and actually gave unsupported scientifically information that made even the campaign for opening schools demonize it. And it was a campaign that was actually talking about clear strategic solutions to deal with the situation as it changes. So we do not want an all open schools policy. We need a government that is able to put clear criteria of when to open schools, how to open schools, which grades to open, and what to do in different cases. And that never happened. And we're again in March now, and I don't think we have a plan. And this pandemic could be coming, the pandemic might actually flatten for a few months again, but nobody knows. According to the live vaccination websites now, Jordan will finish vaccinating at this rate, will finish vaccinating 70% of the population in January 2025. So no plan. And then that means that if we don't have a plan for education. And now actually part of this campaign, we're saying, fine, since the schools, even the private schools, are now lobbying for keeping closures, then why don't you put a plan to give even people in international educational system allow them to not register in the schools, in the private sector schools. Let's see, then the schools will have to say, no, we want to open. So it was like the easy solution. The government doesn't want to plan. The private sector doesn't want to work hard in making sure that, and the important thing is that the numbers of when the numbers they were bringing out all these numbers about how many teachers and students are, and all of us, we do not want to lose any human being to this pandemic. We do not want any young or old person to get the disease. But the numbers were coming out at a certain stage saying how many teachers and students got it. It didn't say how many in schools versus those who are home. Well, what about how many doctors who got it? How many judges who got it? How many lawyers who got it? It was just a reflection of what's happening outside. So we didn't close hospitals. We didn't close any other businesses. So the problem is bad planning, no planning actually. And we're not saying just open schools. And now we're in March. I'm worried that we do not have a plan for next October. And that's what's really scaring us. We want a plan. We're not saying open schools. We want a plan. That's what we need.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the question is the government currently equipped to come up with this plan? And the concern is not, West Amman kids that have their iPads. It's 99% of Jordan's population. I talk to my friends in the refugee camps where they have 10 kids on one broken iPhone. I mean, how many years of schooling are they going to miss? Reem, then Muna on the same subject, please.
Just very quickly, I just wanted to remind Salma that we did suggest to the government some solutions for parents with children under the age of 12. We had a number of solutions. Basically, if mothers want to take or fathers want to take leave from work, if they want to telework and so on, and how Social Security can contribute to this, and also social assistance under the National Aid Fund, depending if the mother and the father are registered with Social Security or if they are not. We basically sent that letter, Salma, if you recall, probably back in April of last year. We need to dig it out again and see what we suggested to the government, and we sent it to the
letters. The numbers
we really had a clear plan. And again, because somebody mentioned, can teleworking be for both parents? Actually, that's what we sent in our letter. It could cover both parents, mothers and fathers, and they could be paid the minimum wage during that period of time. They don't have to be paid, thousands of JDs or what have you. It could be for the low-income families and so on, at least to get us through the pandemic. So these are ideas that we did, work on early on, and we can again maybe lobby for again with the government of Jordan. We do fully understand that schools need to be closed when the rate of cases is really high. We do understand that. But again, we have to have a very clear plan. As Salma mentioned earlier, most of the countries actually did not close schools up until the end when it was really quite critical. Over to you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you. Mona, please.
Just to add to that, I think there was a UN report that showed that Jordan was one of the top 20 countries in the world in terms of numbers of days of school closure. And I think everything that has been said is so spot on. And I would add maybe how much of this is happening because the final decision doesn't have enough women sitting in the decision-making room. Because I think the dynamics, I think the flawed assumption is that the ministry pivoted to online and that's good enough. And they don't realize that online means even in the best environment, and online for an entire year means no very, very poor education at the end of it. So, and that doesn't only hurt women, it hurts an entire generation of innovation, of workforce, of building the economy. And since that's what we're talking about, I think, you know, if we're talking about anything, it's learning to deal with challenges and to really plan for complicated solutions. This is really complex and nobody would deny it, but we're 1 year into it. And as Salma said, what's next? I mean, we still have, you know, hopefully numbers will go down in the next few days, in the next few weeks. We still have 3 months of school. Nobody's talking about them. And does that mean that the children are not going to go back to school till June and then maybe even September is really hurting the whole country in a very bad way. So.
But spot on, Mona, you said that, you know, women are just not part of the decision-making process.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Honest.
That's totally right. Fida, I'm going to stay with you. Hello, we have 4 minutes left, okay? So the title of this webinar was Women Lifting Economies. So the Jordanian economy in particular. And we've had a discussion that's really highlighted the structural barriers, the fact that women's voices are not being heard, the fact that the government may be unable to put plans together. How can we actually leverage everything that women have, whether women-led businesses or women in leadership or women on boards, to actually be able to lift this economy? What needs to be done? Because so far we have quite a stark picture that's been painted during this webinar. But if we can just think in our closing remarks on those points and sort of close, you know, 1 minute each on that point, starting with you, Fida, please.
Thank you, Mary. Great, a great topic to, great statement to close with. So I wish there was a magic wand or something, but to be able to move the needle, I would just try to recap what has been covered, which is not to work in silos, to plan programs and support and whatever we have based on data and based on the needs of women. So have them lead, listen to them, and then do that. To try and bridge the financing gap, because you're doing something, we're doing something, but that's not enough to move the needle on financing women, and to always couple that with business development supports. And one last thing I'd like to add here is to democratize knowledge. And since COVID has, pushed us to be able to use technology, now this is the chance to be able to include everyone. Somebody asked about the transportation challenge being a barrier. We have also social barriers. And now with the whole digitization of everything, it's our chance to be able to provide women with that knowledge, because, it's knowledge could be available anytime, any place. So let's just try to put it out there.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Fida. Salma?
I have to agree with everything that Fida said. I think that we need to, there are some solutions that we've been proposing. Now, Fida and you were talking about the funds that you have that are offered to women. I think to start with today, we have to have 2 forms of funds. In addition to the funds that you're talking about, we need funds to save businesses today, women businesses today. The 500 million JD that the government has offered through the central bank, we don't know if any, which businesses that are owned by women got it, if any. The numbers are even not sex disaggregated. And this is the data. We need to start leveraging data. Fida was talking about the study there that we are doing. We need more data to come up from the government, from the sources, to know where are the gaps and how we can cover them. We need funds that could go as grants to businesses that suffered, like the daycares, the kindergarten owners, all of those who have been hard hit, and nobody has, and even the donors are not talking about that. We've been telling them about it and nobody is doing. Women cannot handle more interest rates, loans with interest. It's too difficult today. So we need some solutions today. And yes, we need to keep going with the long-term solutions. We're having more women in the pipeline for boards, having more knowledge open for women. And also we need to campaign, and this is something that we will be doing. We need to keep working on changing gender stereotypes and gender roles and norms. Because if we do not change that, all the investments we put, we still have women with double burdens. It's not like we just want to celebrate women who are working and they are heroes, that she works and she balances life. We need to change. We need to break this cycle of women having double burdens in order to be able to succeed. We have to do that.
Absolutely, thank you. Reem, please take 2 minutes, and then Mona.
Sure. To me, I think the most important thing is to have a diverse group around the table when we make such plans. What I found during COVID-19, the younger crowd are much smarter than we are, to be honest. They think differently, they can contribute in a different manner. And also we can influence younger generation, because somebody also talked about teenage girls. We need also to start and shift their interests, not to enter into education, health, and so on, because these sectors are highly saturated. So there is more supply than demand. And that's where you see the most sectors that are discriminated against. So for example, just to give you an example, when I started, talking to younger crowd, we came up with a project for women in sports, because they felt this is a sector that is growing. People are more aware about their health, and they want fitness trainers and they want personal trainers. They go more to the gym. Now we have online. They even have gym on wheels. Amazing, and basically they trained 89 female graduates of the universities of Jordan. They started in November. They will graduate in June. Out of the 89, 69 of them secured jobs, some of them in Jordan, some of them in Saudi Arabia, and some of them in Qatar. So I think what we need new ideas, and new ideas will not come just from us. Look at us, we're all more or less the same age group. The younger crowd, I'm sorry I'm saying this, we need to bring people from different socioeconomic backgrounds and different age groups. That's what I wanted to say. And of course, both genders. Over to you, Mary.
No, I totally agree with you. And I'm happy to be at the same level of you guys. Mona, please, your final words.
I think that's a great idea, actually, about diversity and inclusion. And I do believe that we have, in the same spirit, such a diverse, so many initiatives in Jordan that all are moving towards success. They all need to be brought together and to really march to the same rhythm. I think, I have the impression sometimes that we have small pockets of success, but that somehow the voice is not getting amplified. And that, somehow if we imagine the future because this future will come, where we will have equality, where we will have women participating in lifting our economy. And that would happen with having very high level, big problems that absolutely need to be changed, plus then all the additional economic activity that we need to give with funds, whether it's micro or SME or whatever it is, and then having women working in banks, because they will also be understanding clients better, female clients better. And finally, one thing that I always say is we all have the collective power as consumers to support SMEs. And every time we are making a purchase, every single time, if we are really trying hard to look out for that women-led SME and give her a chance with her product, give her real honest feedback, but not ignore it, then we are really helping her build her brand, her whatever product service that she has. And that could go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, an amazing way to end. And I'm just looking at the audience, and we have esteemed members of the banking sector, and we have from Social Security. I won't name names, but thank you to all the audience for attending. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Columbia Center for hosting such an important talk. I think it's a talk we need to be having every 2 weeks to see where we're at and where we need to go. I'd like to thank our panelists, Dr. Salma. Thank you for everything that you do. Reem, Mona, and Fida. Stay safe, everybody, and take good care. Thank you very much.